It is Sunday, December 16th, 2018. This is Seaside Chats, the instant reaction podcast, where we get together and talk about the Seahawks game right after the Seahawks game. And today is not an easier one to discuss as Seattle loses to the San Francisco 49ers 26-23 in overtime. The Seahawks do not clinch a playoff berth today. They've got two more opportunities on their own to do that, beginning next week on Sunday Night Football against the Kansas City Chiefs, and what's become a much more high stakes game than it could have been, as both teams will have something to play for most likely next Sunday night. And then in week 17, the Seahawks host the Arizona Cardinals. So they'd have two more shots to clinch the playoffs. And right now they stand at a 97% chance per 538. So in most scenarios, in virtually all the scenarios, the Seahawks end up in the playoffs, but certainly doesn't feel like a playoff team to a lot of people when you lose to a San Francisco 49ers team that is now 4-10. And I believe two of those wins were against the Arizona Cardinals, unless it's the opposite way around. I can't remember off the top of my head. But joining me today after the show, or after the game and during the show, is John Morgan. John, the Seahawks lose this one, and I do got to shout out our sponsors, Injury Legal Center. Once again, bringing you this podcast for free, Injury Legal Center. If you need a lawyer, 855-631-3830. We'll say that again at the end of the show. So thanks to Injury Legal Center. But John, the Seahawks lose 26-23 in overtime. Criticisms to the officiating, criticisms to the defense, criticisms to the offensive line. You can pick and choose whichever one you'd like or none at all. But this is what people are discussing and we're discussing during the game. What were your thoughts initially in terms of what went wrong for the Seahawks? What were the big things that went wrong for the Seahawks today?
Well, I mean, it was a gnarly loss. I don't think I get as down by these kind of losses as a lot of people. I think people feel a sense of competition neglect, and they see a team like the 49ers and they say, that's a bad team. Of course, you've got to win, but at best, you're going to be a favorite. And every single team has a ton of good talent. And so, when you're on your third string right guard and they're making a lot of critical penalties and you're depending on the run game and you've got some funky conditions, which are causing some weird stuff, and your offense never really gets going. It was a close game. Once you get into the territory where it's a close game, it becomes kind of 50-50. And 49ers won. I don't think it changes my perspective of the team. A lot of what I know the team could potentially not do well didn't work out today. But I don't feel like worried for the team's future. I'm kind of excited that next week has a lot, obviously Seattle's probably not going to miss the playoffs, but just being able to play such a competitive team, with something on the line has me excited. So I'm pretty quick to move on. There's really nothing to worry about. I don't think something happened that changes the way I see the team. Obviously the secondary's green. When McDougald went down, communication was, pretty fractured. But, this stuff happens. The 49ers are an NFL team and they were at home. It was a funky field. There was rain. And the Seahawks lost. It was a 50-50 game they lost. They've won some. They're going to lose some of these, even against a team like the 49ers.
Yeah, and one of the storylines today will certainly be the play of Nick Mullins on the other side. Mullins goes 20 of 29, 275 yards, one touchdown, no interceptions, a passer rating of 110.6. And the Seahawks did put pressure on Mullins at the end of the game, getting a couple sacks on that final drive of regulation there by Frank Clark, and Jaron Reed had two sacks. And there was certainly something there with Nick Mullins, though. And in both games now, we've seen Mullins twice in 3 weeks. The San Francisco 49ers, by all accounts, of course, have every intention to go with Jimmy Garoppolo next year, which makes total sense. And Nick Mullins is a small sample size here, and it can speak to the proficiency of Kyle Shanahan to call a game, perhaps, and of Robert Saleh, the defensive coordinator, and the familiarity he has with Pete Carroll and Pete Carroll's offense and what they game plan for. So there's a lot going in San Francisco's favor there in terms of the passing game, perhaps. But in terms of the play of Nick Mullins and the play calling by Kyle Shanahan in the passing game, what were your thoughts?
Mullins looks like a poised, capable backup quarterback. In 5 years, he could be Case Keenum or something like that. I don't think that's an insult. I think what he's doing is impressive. But I think that Seattle should expect to beat Nick Mullins, even in a situation like this. And it's just, Seattle's defense has been trending towards middle of the road for most of the season. And Kyle Shanahan is an excellent coordinator, and it's his second look at this team. I think that Norton got a little blitz happy, but I think some of that happened because Seattle wasn't getting consistent pass rush. Obviously, I'm kind of consoling myself by thinking about Reed balling out. I'm thinking about Clark balling out because those are the guys that are the building blocks. They're going to be with the team, and games like today, they feel so painful when they happen, but they kind of don't matter. And so I think that it's going to be after like a ton of hype and a ton of attention on Seattle, and how much that they seem to be surpassing people's expectations. It feels like this is such a big disappointment, but in reality, they lost a very close game on the road against, a division opponent. And this is the NFL. And I saw some good play and I saw a bad organization and overall competency in the secondary. And that's kind of been par for the course all season. I don't know how that manifests against KC. I don't know if something else will make it not matter that much because of the pass rush or something like that. But I think Mullins is a decent quarterback. I think Shanahan is obviously very good at developing quarterbacks and has a great eye for targeting weaknesses in a defense. But I think overall, I think Seattle just has to accept the fact that until they can have a more dynamic passing game that is not so dependent on running the ball to create play fakes, they're probably going to find themselves in these close games. And close, grinded out games are pretty 50-50, and sometimes you win and it feels so exciting and like a testament to the character of your team, and sometimes you lose, and it doesn't mean that Seattle is not the exact same team we knew they were. They are a young talented team that just doesn't have they don't have all the talent they need. They are exactly what their record seems to indicate.
And when you speak about the young talent on the team, who are some of the players that stood out to you today? Because defensively, we saw Bradley McDougald go out early, and then Delano Hill has to come in and play more snaps. And it's Tedrick Thompson and Delano Hill as the safeties. I didn't see Trey Flowers' name called a lot today. Shaquille Griffin with that big pass interference penalty called on him at the end of the game in overtime. That was a critical play to come right after Puna Ford made this big tackle for a loss. It looks like the 49ers are going to have to punt because it's, second and long is just very hard to make up in the NFL. And if it wasn't for that pass interference, what were your thoughts? I guess I'm asking two questions that are not really related at all, but what were your thoughts on that final play on Shaquille Griffin? And then who were some of the players on defense that maybe did stand out to you in a positive way or negative way?
I don't think Griffin's playing that well. I don't think that he lacks potential. Sometimes he plays with a style that feels like hair on fire when he needs to kind of slow down instead of going for like the big pop on the guy who's trying to catch the ball. Maybe look where the ball is. But, that's something. I mean, I think we get cynical because sometimes players don't develop, but sometimes players do develop. And I'm just willing to be patient with them. I mean, I've seen him doing basically the same stuff all year, but sometimes it's going to, just because of the way football works, sometimes a guy will do poorly, but nothing bad will come of it. And sometimes a guy will actually do pretty well, but they happen to be at the scene where something, some other players doing something even better than them. As far as the young talent, I mean, it's, there's Jefferson, there's Reed, obviously, there's Clark. Poona Ford has flashed at times. But I think a lot of the young talent is actually on the offense. I mean, obviously, Chris Carson has turned into something, I mean, genuinely special. The way he can just chug and get positive yardage, even in a crowded space, just the will, the fight to get into the end zone there, that was so excellent. Simmons, I don't underestimate the impact of Fluker. So when Simmons came in and was able to replicate a lot of the production of Fluker, I mean, that's something that could be very valuable because he's going to continue to be cheap for quite a while. He's young. I don't know if there's any further danger of his injuries, becoming some sort of chronic problem. But it seems like Seattle's talent on offense is really where a lot of the hope is. And they've got some very important, vital pieces on defense, but they're probably going to need to continue to create that kind of always compete, win forever situation where guys are not just given jobs and that everyone has to, because in the offseason, I think they're going to have to just bring in a ton of competition and see if some of these young guys sink or swim. And obviously, I like Flowers too. I've been skeptical of Flowers, but at this point, I think at the very least, he's going to be able to fill the Byron Maxwell role or the Brandon Browner role very effectively. And so I think that there is young talent. And I think that because Seattle drafts for upside, that young talent doesn't have that kind of, they're doing okay today, but they have no ceiling kind of feel. I mean, these are young guys that if they reach their ceiling, then Seattle becomes a juggernaut again.
And offensively, we saw the return of Doug Baldwin to the offense, and in the first quarter, first half, that seemed to have a pretty significant impact on Russell Wilson in the offense. Baldwin catching 2 touchdowns, proving to be, a pretty critical player in that sense. But after that, the offense couldn't really do much at all. How much of that do you think was affected by the rain? How much was the adjustments by the 49ers? Or how much was just, failure to execute? Because it certainly looked like in some of those situations, Russell Wilson maybe didn't make the best decisions, or whether it was, running, or whether it was, that 3rd-and-1 play that they had, where it seemed like Russell Wilson could have thrown it a run for a first down, and instead got sacked, and they called it a fumble. Either way, he recovered it. But what was the biggest offensive problems in your minds in the second half?
Well, I mean, it seemed like penalties that struck at the exact wrong time. I think a lot of times we blame the officiating when a penalty seems to be too important. But the fact is that if the player committed a penalty on that play, they're going to have to call it, or else they're essentially giving people an advantage for cheating. And so I think that if I don't have the information directly in front of me, but intuitively, it felt like quite a bit of win probability swung just on these crushing penalties right after some sort of big play for Seattle. And so I think that was some part of the offense stalling. I think that the defense, the 49ers defense, seemed to be really keying what Seattle was doing. So Seattle wasn't getting the kind of plays where you could really see a receiver getting open through deception. And so the defense looked like it was, or the offense looked like it was figured out a little bit, which I think is a relatively natural thing to happen. You face most teams once, and then you have another team that has, it means so much for them to try to beat you, just like it used to be with Jeff Fisher and the Rams. You could tell that they had brought all their tricks because they're, 49ers are probably not going to win the next few games. But with this game, Shanahan has brought so much, hope and confidence. And so they really came out with so much desire to win, and they kept doing everything it took to try to foil what Seattle was attempting to do. So things started to stall. And with Wilson, I think you can clearly see this kind of transition where he's trying to become more of a pocket passer. And I absolutely celebrate him doing that. And one of the kind of cool things about Russell Wilson that I think makes people underestimate him is he's always trying to improve himself. So he often kind of looks a little like clumsy or awkward because he's at the very bleeding edge of his own ability at that time. But because of that, all through his career, I've seen him actually making meaningful strides to becoming a better player. And so right now I see this kind of awkward phase where I think he's thinking, I could rush it, but I'm not supposed to rush it. And the better choice would be to throw it, but I don't really like my read. And you see him kind of like halfway through those two positions. And then it leads into he forgets that there's a pass rush, and he kind of forgets that he can't just run away from everyone every single time. But next year that could be Russell Wilson throwing for 5,000 yards because he's really effectively become a pocket passer with that exceptional first read, that pre-snap awareness. So it's tough because you feel embarrassed, and there seemed to be so much on the line with the ability to absolutely clinch the playoffs. But I'm glad that he's doing his best, and I don't really care that he's out there making small errors if it's in the if he's striving to become a better quarterback, and I think he is becoming a better quarterback. And and the offense didn't really show up today, and it kind of stalled out, and it was probably overachieving a little bit. It's that Nick Saban rat poison idea that as soon as you're being recognized for something, it's often an indication that you're kind of like on a hot streak, and so you're probably kind of towards the end of it. And so I think that the offense was maybe overachieving a little bit, but it's still very good. Defense is young. It still made some interesting plays. It still kind of kept the game tight. And so I don't want to blame anyone. I guess I have a little bit of a different temperament. I don't think this affected how I see the big picture of Seattle's season or their future, but it's a crappy loss. I mean, the whole time it sucks, and you're so frustrated, and you want to kind of like, I think that emotionally you want to lash out, but I just don't feel that way. I mean, I saw a good team face a not very good team that had a great day.
And isn't there something to Russell Wilson not having his best days in the rain? I know that, raining today, I feel like that was something that was brought up. And I don't know how many quarterbacks do have their best days in the rain, but And even if that was the case, let's say that the Seahawks make the playoffs and they go to Dallas is the most likely scenario that still exists. The Seahawks are still 97%, I think I said, to make the playoffs. And it would be Dallas. They're gonna be inside, and then if they moved on, it's not likely to rain. Say in LA and in New Orleans, it's gonna be outside. So it's not exactly a scenario that's going to come up unless they were to find themselves in Chicago. But I guess that's something that people may talk about as well. But I just don't know how much takeaway you can ever bring out of the conditions that they were playing in there at the end of the game. I know that the Seahawks got some really interesting productions from their defensive tackle position today. Jaron Reed, 2 sacks, 4 quarterback hits. Poona Ford, 3 tackles for a loss. That right there, the defensive tackle, which is something that Pete Carroll has been looking for during his entire tenure, really, between, he's had guys like Brandon Mebane, but really had some close calls and disappointments with guys like Jordan Hill. And it sounds like, it looks like with Jaron Reed, he's got a definite superstar in the making, and Poona Ford showed a lot of potential today and has flashed some potential throughout the season, but certainly today had his best game of the year. And going to the playoffs, if that's the case, if they do go into the playoffs, there's got to be some hope too, in the way that, like, okay, we know that they've got guys that are established that can play and who have a lot of playoff experience, like Russell Wilson. But then if they get some of these other guys who've just sort of been waiting in the wings, like a Poona Ford, then maybe they've even got some more talent than had been previously thought, or at least if it comes in at the right time, then maybe they've got a few more weapons to work with in any playoff scenario. Any thoughts on the way that Poona Ford in the defensive tackle position played today and as of late, and how does that affect Ken Norton's defensive game plan if they're getting pass rush from the defensive tackle position?
Yeah, I saw Ford play well. I don't overestimate my ability to read how well defensive tackles are doing in real time, because when you see a guy make a few splash plays, sometimes you think like that guy must be balling out, but he might also be getting cleared out in other plays. So I don't have a really well-developed opinion about Poona Ford. It's his first year, and to even be doing stuff like this is very valuable. And so I think that's great. And that's all I need to say about him in a way, is like, I mean, that he's doing well, that he's contributing, that he came out of like Seattle invested very little to get him. And so that's very good. But Reed has arrived. I mean, Reed has been doing this. Reed just told everybody to go vote for him to go to the Pro Bowl or whatever the hell they do, what process they use now. Because it's unfortunate, because Reed has been so good, and it feels like his reputation hasn't caught up with his play. But if you're watching Reed, you're seeing a guy who has that rare combination to shoot the gap, to tackle in the open field, to close so quickly that a quarterback can't just like dish it out, but also to be a good enough run defender that he can always be in there. And that's a very rare combination. So I think when you have that really high level talent, that's what you get excited about. Because in a way, the foundational, the fill-in guys, those guys can be acquired through free agency always. Those guys can be acquired when you have lots of draft picks, like Seattle usually tries to get, even though, they've been a little bit prodigal with their draft picks recently, trying to pick up already established guys. But I don't mind having Dwayne Brown. I mean, that guy was moving so well on the outside, and he looks a lot better than he did last year. So, they have these high upside guys. I think that Seattle is they're going to be kind of a fringe playoff contender this year. I know that when a team is winning, that there's a sense that maybe they're just about to transform into a new level. And if they had just absolutely crushed the 49ers today, if they had just, it would just been easy. I mean, that would have been the best possible outcome. And who knows? Because you get into the contest, you get into the playoffs, you have some sort of chance. All sorts of weird stuff happens. But I think overall, what could be happening, what could be really exciting, for the most part, is exciting. You're getting some of these high upside guys to develop. Pass rush, to me, is still the most important part of a defense. And with Reed, you have a guy who's a genuinely good pass rusher, who also is a genuinely good run defender. And I think guys like that who do not tell the opposing offense what is the game plan, do not give the opposing offense something that they can key or target to try to exploit, are super valuable. And I just hope that Reed starts getting the kind of recognition, because I think he's kind of a hometown hero right now. But he's like, I watch a ton of football, and I don't see defensive tackles with the complete game he has.
The other thing, of course, that people are going to be talking about right now, obviously, is that game next week against the Kansas City Chiefs, Sunday Night Football. The Chiefs coming in at 11-3, right off of a loss to the LA Chargers, meaning that the Chiefs need to win to maintain first place, not just in the AFC West, but in the AFC. The Chiefs are in position there, but if they lose and the LA Chargers win, and I'm just looking it up here to be sure who the LA Chargers are playing next week. But if they lose and the Chargers win, then not only do the Chiefs, fall out of first place, they go all the way down to a wild card after they had been in first place, for basically the entire season, with the great season being had by Pat Mahomes. And then all of a sudden, you look at the Kansas City Chiefs. They go from a team, and this is a familiar story with Kansas City most of the time, is they get off to these big starts and then they lose at the end of the year. This is a team that was 9-1, but they've lost 2 of their last 4. This is a team that is defensively 31st in yards allowed, 28th in points allowed, 32nd in passing yards allowed, 31st in yards per carry allowed. And these are just like some rudimentary type of stats that don't tell a whole picture, but it just sort of gives you an idea that can you move the ball against the Kansas City Chiefs? The historical record here in 2018 would say that you probably can. It doesn't mean that you're going to win the game. It certainly doesn't mean that you're going to stop Patrick Mahomes, because the way this secondary is, or at least this defense has played against Nick Mullins, you would think that Pat Mahomes has a shot at putting up 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. And, that's mostly a case of the fact that if you go from Earl Thomas to Tedrick Thompson, if they have to go from Bradley McDougall to Delano Hill, if they're going from Richard Sherman to Shaquille Griffin, it's just not as talented of a group, especially when you're talking about Cam Chancellor and some of the guys of yesteryear that they just don't have anymore. So going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, this is going to be a difficult offense for Seattle to slow down. And conversely, maybe this is an opportunity for Russell Wilson to have a more productive day than he's had against, say, the Minnesota Vikings last week. And, who knows exactly what could happen, but it seems like a higher scoring affair. And all that being said, the Seahawks at home in prime time in the Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll era have been very, very, very difficult to beat. And, the Kansas City Chiefs are coming off of 2 losses in the last 4 games. Both 2 really good teams, the LA Rams and the LA Chargers. Are the Seahawks a really good team? That remains to be seen. And I think that they are. I think at what it has been seen is that the Seahawks are a decent team. But in terms of this matchup next week, John, what are your expectations? What are the vulnerabilities maybe in Kansas City? Do you see the Chiefs, just in general, do you see the Chiefs as one of the top 2 or 3 Super Bowl championship contenders? Or do you think on the down low, maybe they aren't quite as strong as the LA Chargers, LA Rams, New Orleans Saints, and so on?
I think they're a contender. Andy Reid has the reputation of kind of beginning the season with a head of steam and a lot of new ideas, and then defenses figure it out. I don't know if that's a canard, but that's often what is said of Andy Reid. And it's certainly a tremendous challenge for Pete Carroll and Norton to try to figure out, how to stop this. They're going to be outgunned as far as the skill position matchups, but that may not be definitive. You can do a lot with scheme, and a pass rush certainly can change things. I'm not pessimistic. I do not discount the possibility that Kansas City could come in and just absolutely run up the score. Seattle's offense looked very stagnant. And if they get behind, there's the possibility that they cannot effectively play fake, which I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but they certainly do not look very effective when they're not incorporating play action into their passing game. But I don't, in my gut, I have that weird feeling like there could be a win. Seattle's at home. It's a big game. Seattle has a lot to play for. I'm sort of pulling Chargers a little bit because Brandon Beane's kind of my guy, and he's in my thoughts. And I want that team to do well. They feel like a fun team. But I mean, as far as the Seahawks go, I don't think they should look at this like they're totally overmatched. I think KC could lose by 2 touchdowns and win the Super Bowl. I mean, the NFL produces all sorts of strange results like that, especially, against a home team. So, it's going to be about whether the offense shows up, whether Seattle can continue to put themselves into good game states so that they are, not having to rally back without, with every single one of the receivers, going one-on-one and no fun or exploitable matchups there. I think KC's defense is not great, but with Houston back and D Ford, they have the kind of quick pass rushers that have often really made kind of exposed Russell Wilson as he's kind of lost some of his quickness because he tries to do some of his, I'm going to get away from this. I'm going to scramble back 20 yards and I'm going to, make a mega bootleg or something like that. And he gets caught because, some of these guys are as fast as him now. And I don't think that that's probably a situation where Seattle wants to be passing and passing and passing with no ability to slow down the pass rush. And so it's going to be, I think Seattle's going to try to force KC into a grinded out game. And it's just going to be a matter of can they actually do that? And many teams have tried. And it's good that just last week, San Diego was able to do that, or just a few days ago, San Diego was able to do that. And they obviously have a very similar system and formula. And they have the kind of edge rush pass rushers. And if Seattle could get someone other than Reed and Clark really going to not just because every quarterback is affected by disruption of the pocket. And Mahomes has the kind of arm talent where sometimes it looks like he's not, looks like he can make an awful looking throw and it zips exactly to the guy. But I think that if Seattle could get another pass rusher going and they can make sure that they don't fall behind too much. I mean, that sounds kind of tautological, of course, because if you're behind, you're probably going to lose. But in a sense, Seattle doesn't play a kind of football that allows them to catch up very much. And so we'll see. I'm not really, I'm kind of excited. It feels like the first playoff game of the new era, of this new Seahawks era. And what they do is we're going to remember that. And whatever happens from here, I don't think this game is going to be forgotten. So it's kind of thrilling. And I don't just discount Andy Reid. I've seen these kind of reputations seem foolish once a guy gets the right team in the right situation. And maybe this is their year. They're certainly excellent. But I don't think Seattle should assume they're going to lose. I think it's a reasonably 50-50 game depending on the breaks.
I think that for me, the optimism and everything comes from, I think for me, I watch sports certainly at the idea of winning and losing is you want the win. And that's why we watch that for that reason. So that if we have a rooting interest, even that's like, say, you want to see a single player do well or a player win or a coach win or a team win or whatever, it's like, okay, you can watch for that. Obviously, we watch a lot of NFL games, most of us do, that we have no rooting interest in whatsoever. So the Seahawks do lose today, but I do think that the fact that I also watch it for the fact that it's a good narrative, it's a good story. It's interesting to have games that matter. And if the Seahawks lose against the 49ers and then win against the Chiefs, doesn't really matter that they lost to the 49ers. And if they lose to the Chiefs and then beat the Arizona Cardinals and get into the playoffs and none of their position in the playoffs changes whatsoever, these two games really won't matter. Will it indicate something? Then absolutely, that's possible. It could indicate that it'll be a loss maybe in the playoffs. But also we can look at it and say that this is still a team that doesn't tend to lose any games that aren't within reach at the end. So there's a high probability that as long as the Seahawks make the playoffs, they're going to give us a notable game to watch or an interesting game to watch. And knowing also that Pete Carroll, for whatever reason, has been successful in his first game of the playoffs, that's 6-0 in the 6 playoff trips for Seattle, then there's maybe even a chance that the Seahawks will give fans 2 more games. So today's loss against the San Francisco 49ers, while not ideal and makes you feel like, oh, they could have won. And I think really at the end of the day, it could boil down to if they had a better guard play on that one moment in the overtime when Russell Wilson threw to J.D. McKissick. It was a beautiful play call. It was a beautiful play execution for 10 players on the offense. And then it was just a poor job by Ethan Pochik. Obviously, Ethan Pochik is a guy that will come into the spotlight this week, not just because, he came in place of Jordan Simmons, who himself is in place of DJ Fluker, but it seems quite obvious like Jordan Simmons is a guy that maybe could replace Fluker next year, and that Ethan Pochik, for the times that we've seen him this season, which is in weeks 1 and 2, and then today, it doesn't feel as good that Ethan Pocic, a second round pick last year, is going to be able to necessarily hang with this team. And if they have to beat the Kansas City Chiefs next week, and Jordan Simmons, the injury to his right knee, I believe it's his right knee, but the injury to his knee, which is what basically cost him 4 years at USC. And Pete Carroll saying after the game that I think it's a mild sprain, but we'll have to double check that. But the point being, there's a chance now that Jordan Simmons won't play against the Chiefs, which would of course mean Ethan Pocic or maybe Joey Hunt would step in if DJ Fluker is not able to come back. What are your thoughts on Ethan Pocic and sort of all of this discussion of Tom Cable's offensive lineman and the job being done by Mike Solari? These are two coaches that have different philosophies and different game plans and styles, and it just might be that Ethan Pocic is never going to be a Mike Solari offensive lineman. What are your thoughts there?
I kind of wonder if Poe was supposed to be a center. I think Justin Britt kind of emerged as a center, and when they got him, they thought that he had kind of a tweener position, and he certainly hasn't done well. He just seems like, I don't know. I don't think I want to like categorize or whether deliver like a lengthy list of the things I've seen him do wrong, but he does not seem to be doing well. I think it would be one of those situations where there is sort of a weakest link effect when there is one offensive lineman who's doing very poorly and the defense can exploit it, and it seems to be causing too much of an effect, too much damage. And so I don't know. I mean, he's not making it. He's not surviving. He hasn't been able to do well. And the times he's gotten on the field, he's rarely on the field. You draft guys, and I'm sure that there was a plan at the time, some way that he was going to develop, some or some position he was going to play. It just hasn't worked out. And if it has to be Hunt, I don't think that's good. I mean, this sounds ridiculous coming from a relatively small guy, but Hunt's tiny for an offensive lineman, and it really, I think he's scrappy, and it might actually help for pass blocking. But Seattle wants to be moving that pile so much, and that's so much they're not looking for those kind of horizontal seams so much anymore. They're really trying to get that, that vertical push. And so when you have a guy who's probably not going to be getting that same kind of leverage on the opposing defensive tackle, that's problematic. So I don't know. Carroll's infamously sunny when it comes to injuries. I love that. I love that about him, frankly. I love his overall optimism. I think it's allowed him to do a lot of brave things that have helped the franchise immensely. I think you could also link it some of the worst decisions he's made. But I'm happy. I've been a Seahawks fan for a long time, and Carroll is the apex. And so I'm not. I think that they're going to come. I think they're going to really show something. I think that they're going to empty their bag of tricks. I think we're going to see maybe some special team shenanigans. I think we're going to maybe see some some trick plays, because it's going to be a tough opponent, and a win is going to feel so good, and it's going to be such a good motivational tactic for the young guys, and it's a young team. And so while it's so painful to actually just care about a team that you have no control over and just watch them slowly crumble and lose, and I can understand just how I think that like on a like a endocrine hormonal level, like that I'm like I feel lousy, and I don't think there's anything that I could do about that necessarily. But as far as like the big picture, and I always want the team to win the Super Bowl. And while it's fun to see them do something else, that's what I care about. That's the goal that I want for the team. And if you look at where the young talent is, and you look at how some of the money that Seattle allocated toward talent is just not doing anything this year, you have a team that's going to go into the next season with a lot of young talent that's not really making a lot of money, a really good eye for talent with Pete Carroll. He has such an excellent eye for talent, especially certain positions, and an offense that at least has the foundation of working, and a franchise quarterback. I mean, Russell Wilson, I think sometimes is the most embarrassing franchise quarterback because he tries so much and he risks so much. And so he can be put in positions where he looks really kind of clumsy and awkward, but he's a franchise quarterback, and that is so rare. And I think this is a pretty exciting position for the team to be in. You can look at last year, and they were kind of similar when it came to the overall level of the team, but a lot of their best players were expensive or old or approaching a point where the injuries were going to begin to erode their talent, and that's not where this team is this year. Guys are young, guys are hungry. At the very worst, they're at the plateau period of their peak, or they're gaining, or they're growing. And so this is a development year to be able to push and make the playoffs, to be able to take down a offensive juggernaut like the KC Chiefs potentially. that's gravy. And this team is on the rise, and that's really exciting. And unfortunately, when you're a team just as good as Seattle seems to be, sometimes you're going to go on the road and just suck. And there's a lot of little funny things that happen, but overall, Seattle got beat by a team that played better.
Yeah, and yeah, I think in those years when people expect you to develop, like the 2010 Seattle Seahawks, when some people wished they would go 6-10 and get a higher draft pick and miss the playoffs, and instead, they go 7-9, make the playoffs. That playoff run and beating the Saints and getting Beastquake and having some more momentum going into the offseason, it feels like it gives you a better pitch that you're building something. It feels like you've got a better atmosphere around it, rather than being like, okay, well, we sucked, so we're going to get rid of some guys, we're going to change some things, and instead of feeling like, okay, we actually are coming off of we're a playoff team and we're young and there's other things to look forward to with Seattle. And looking at the players that they're expected to come back next year, and how many holes that they have to fill. First of all, the Seahawks, I believe I know I tweeted this out, but I believe it was the third most cap room expected in the NFC. And they're going to cut Cam Chancellor just by way of injury, and that'll save them like something like $9 million too. They're going to have plenty of money to go out there if they want to. A lot of that will be spent on retaining their own players, because that's how the Seahawks typically operate, is that they like to keep their core together. They don't make big free agent splashes for outside free agents. But even still, looking at it, like you said, they have the quarterbacks. So they've got Russell Wilson. At running back, they've got Carson and Penny. At wide receiver, they've got Tyler Lockett. They've got David Moore, who hasn't shown up very much in the last 3 weeks. Just like one target one target today or whatever, and he hadn't made a catch in 3 weeks, but that changed today. And it seems like a good player to at least build around as a number 3. You've got Doug Baldwin. Dwayne Brown is locked in. There's certain things that they're on offense where it's like, okay, if they get the right guy, if they move a piece here, certainly it seems like guard is a place that they're going to be looking at still. Maybe they keep Justin Britt, maybe they don't. Maybe by releasing Justin Britt and saving some money there, they do upgrade Joey Hunt or Ethan Pochik to that position and make a competition there. And then defensively, looking at it like Jaron Reed, Frank Clark, who I believe has no shot at leaving this team. They're going to give him the franchise tag or give him an extension. And today he got his 12th sack of the year. He's the first player since Patrick Kearney in 2007 on the Seahawks to get 12 sacks in a season. And they're the only 2 guys to do that in the 2000s. Bobby Wagner, and then some of those secondary guys like Trey Flowers, and we'll see what happens. Bradley McDougald. Certainly they've got the players to build around, and then they've got some money to spend. For you on days like today, when you lose to the San Francisco 49ers, when you look at it, a lot of people will point to the penalty flags, and I saw today that it was the most penalty yards on a Seahawks team since 1979, or maybe ever. And the last time that they had this many was 1979. But in terms of, if they go out and they get this position or improve this aspect of their game, whether that's the offensive line or the defensive line, would you have one takeaway today in terms of what they need to shore up for next season?
I don't know that I have one takeaway from what they need to shore up next season, but I think that they're in a position where the young, talented players are going to be able to produce above and beyond their contract. And that's kind of what you're looking for. And that the guys that the kind of the depth, I think that that's usually easier to attain. And so I think that they're in a good position. It's at that point in the season where right now we might feel like, of course, they're going to win one of these games and then they're going to be vaulted towards. But of course, it doesn't have to go that way. It could crumble. And so we don't know. I don't want to just assume everything's going to be okay. But I see the foundation of this team. And I guess it's kind of how you deal with loss. I mean, do you want to blame someone? Do you want to look for the reasons that it wasn't really a loss or that you got screwed or something like that? Or do you want to get grim? And just as someone who's dealt with a lot of loss, it makes me weirdly optimistic as long as it's not the kind of loss that you kind of don't recover from. And this isn't anything like that. It's a very narrow loss on the road. Even if the 49ers had not won a single game, that's still typically relatively justifiable. Mullen is not some sort of klutz who's going to bleed turnovers. He's clearly competent. That makes a gigantic difference. It means that they can run an offense. And so that was a competent team, filled with pride that had a lot to play for. And I'm not saying that Seattle didn't play hard, because that's that's kind of a slight. I mean, I think they wanted it really bad. But, we say any given Sunday because one of the thrilling things about the NFL is you don't really know exactly what's going to happen. Even when one team looks super dominant, there's a chance that something is going to happen that's going to undermine them. And Seattle's certainly not that. They're a team that's a bit above average. And the 49ers are very bad, but they're not so bad. They're not, they're not some sort of parody of an NFL team. And so I think that, when they do approach the offseason, the reason that you're excited is they keep finding these high-end talents. They keep making savvy decisions as far as free agents. They don't go out and get the guy who's going to cost so much that he has to be a hyper superstar just to justify his cap hit. They get the guy who maybe people didn't know how good they were, like Averill or Bennett or McDougald, or Mingo to an extent. And so I look at this and I say, you got the foundation. You've got this quarterback who's proven again and again that they do a lot of the little small stuff. Plus, they're incredibly talented and they have beautiful deep ball accuracy. So they're gonna give you a chance to have a top 5 offense, and that they're going to give you that floor of probably no worse than top 16 or something like that. And so that's the makings of a competitive window. As for what happens, we're going to have to kind of see. I mean, that's so long from now. But I just look at the team, and when I see them play like they did today, I see the guys that I need to see doing well. And though some of the guys I want to do well are not doing well, it's kind of, I know that. And so, it's an exciting time. It's I don't know if Penny's ever going to be even better than Carson, but Carson's pretty damn good. There's a lot of money to be spent, and I think Seattle will figure out a way to get a whole bunch of draft picks. And, it's for now, these guys are proving themselves. Nothing is decided. Any team can go on a run. But if you're looking at the overall big picture, if you're trying to do like an analysis of the overall health of the franchise, I think they're doing excellent, and I think that there's good reason to be excited.
Absolutely, John Morgan. That's it for the Seaside Instant Reaction podcast. Just want to give another shout out to our sponsor. We are sponsored by Injury Legal Center, a personal injury law firm who has been specializing in auto accidents in California, Nevada, and Washington for over 20 years. If you have an auto accident or a slip and a fall, call Injury Legal Center toll free at 855-631-3830, and they'll immediately set you up with a doctor and handle all contact with the insurance companies for you. Injury Legal Center works on a contingency basis, so you pay nothing out of pocket for legal fees or doctor visits unless they win your case. With over 2,000 active accident cases, they have a 98% success rate on verdicts against insurance companies. Call ILC today. That's our a sponsor for Seaside Chat. So if you like these shows and you like having a sponsor so that they're out here to enjoy, then call them at 855-631-3830 if you need help with a slip and a fall, an accident. Injury Legal Center. Thank you guys over at Injury Legal Center. And thank you, John Morgan, for joining the podcast once again. The Seahawks do not win today, do not clinch a playoff spot. But, John, there's plenty to look forward to, right?
I think that, if you look at every single franchise, if you look at every single iteration of the Seahawks, if you're not excited about where this team is and its potential, then I think you're misreading the situation.
Absolutely. The Seahawks, if they just win one of their next 2 games, and even if they did go 8-8, which is nobody wants, we want to see them post a winning record, but they could still make the playoffs. And if they do that, it's 7 postseason trips under Pete Carroll. Mike Holmgren had 6, and prior to Mike Holmgren, the whole franchise had 4 in 23 years. So, 7 postseason trips. There are ways to enjoy football without winning a Super Bowl. Not that the Seahawks are out of contention for that either, which is the whole point. It's December 16th, 2018. This has been Seaside Chats. Tune in. If you're a Patreon subscriber, the next episode will be at Patreon. $2 a month is the level to get all the episodes of the show at just $2 a month for the supporters there at Patreon. And that next episode will be coming up this week as we preview the Kansas City Chiefs Sunday Night Football. So thanks for listening to this chat. Come back next time for the next one.